Charisma News put out an article explaining why they thought the transgender movement makes no sense. As I've mentioned before, charisma should be your dump stat, but let's see what they have to say. Every day, expectant couples celebrate when they discover the gender of their unborn babies. Yet today we have educators, psychiatrists, and politicians who believe it is wrong to label children boys or girls. Our culture has gone crazy. No one's saying it's wrong to call a boy or a girl a girl. Statistically, it's likely that a person will conform to the gender that matches their, dirty bits. So, when a child is born with a penis, for example, it's likely that it will identify as a boy. However, there are cases where a person's identity does not match the genitals they were born with, or even that the genitals they were born with do not fit into some easily defined category. An announcement of gender is not a decree from above. It is simply the most likely assumption of what gender the child will identify as. It is not crazy to assume there will be differences within the population. Instead of the traditional options of male and female that have worked well for human beings for thousands of years, we now have a rainbow of choices: transgender, bigender, gender fluid, and genderqueer. Facebook offers its users 58 different ways to describe a person's gender, including neither and intersex. Wow, shame on Facebook for trying to make people feel welcome to their public system. Not to be cynical, but I get the feeling that was more of a monetary move on Facebook's part. If more people feel comfortable there, they'll receive more traffic, which in the end is their bottom line. And what's wrong with an intersex option? Yes, some people are born with reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't match the norm. Are you suggesting they should be excluded from society simply for having different body structure? I hate to be the one to tell you this, but society does change. Some things that were accepted in the past are not acceptable now, and vice versa. Just because things are different doesn't mean they're automatically bad. Sound crazy? Don't you dare question it. We are expected to accept this unorthodox attitude because it's progressively inclusive. And if you challenge the transgender movement, or dare to label gender confusion as a psychological disorder, you will be demonized as a cruel hate monger. That's because it's not a psychological disorder and is no longer recognized as such by the psychological community. There is, of course, the stress, anxiety, and depression that can be caused by forcing someone to live against what they identify as. 1. Gender is a biological reality, not just an emotional feeling. Last year, an Oregon woman named Rachel Dolezal was exposed as a fraud because she claimed she was African American, even though she was born to white parents. Dolezal even became a local leader of the NAACP until her elaborate scan unraveled. She told NBC's Matt Lauer, "I identify as black," but she was laughed off the national stage because everybody knows you can't change your race just because you want to. DNA determines race, you can't become black. Gender is not simply a biological matching of genitals, but how a person identifies. While that is one specific case, where Dolezal seemed to be assigning a racial designation to herself that doesn't apply, it is possible for your body to have unexpected features that are unforeseen and different from the norm. If I had a mutation that caused me to produce excess melanin, would I identify as black? I don't know, but I would at least have a reason to. The same goes for transgendered people. They have a valid reason to identify with a different gender from the one they were assigned at birth. Usually, this is a genetic component, structural differences within the reproductive organs, or even structural differences within the brain itself. But, no matter what the cause, they are not comfortable being forced to live as a gender they don't associate with, so why should they be forced to conform? The Dolezal case is nothing like people who fall outside classical gender understanding and is a fallacious comparison. So why don't we apply the same scientific standard to gender? Today's code of political correctness says that if you were born a woman but now feel you are a man, you can use the men's restroom and change your official gender identity. It is not simply a feeling. There have been studies to show that the transgendered brain is different in significant ways from a cisgendered brain of the gender they were born with, and more similar to the brain of the gender they identify as. Bed nucleus of the striae terminals, a brain structure that is part of sexual behavior, is more likely to align with the gender a person identifies with. One of the bonuses of doing these videos is that I've had to research and learn and turn to those who have much more expertise than me. Let's turn this over to my friend Leslie. She's needed to learn much more than I ever will. Leslie?
On this genetically inborn thing, it's worth mentioning that genetics are no surefire yardstick either. A person is typically born with 46 chromosomes, XX or XY being the most common in humans. Most are comfortable being a cisgender woman or man respectively. This means they are comfortable with the gender that the doctor guesses when they're born. Sometimes, however, they're not born that way. Sometimes they get 45XO. That means they have no second chromosome. This is known as Turner syndrome. This is also 1 in 2,500 female births. This does not make them half a person. There's 47XXY. This is known as Klinefelter syndrome. This is 1 in 500 male births. There are even those born with XXXY. They get all the sex chromosomes from each parent. It's a variation of Klinefelter's. That is 1 in 50,000 male births. There's 47XYY. This is Jacob's syndrome. That is 1 in 1,000 births. This does not make these people more male than other men. These genetic conditions do not in turn determine whether a person will identify as male or female. There are those born XY, for example, that have partial to complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. They develop partly or completely as female from day one. They can't react to testosterone. Without genetic testing, you would never know these people were intersexed at all. Can you see my genes? Back to you, Tim.
But if a woman can become a man, what's next? Someone will decide they want to defy the laws of science and change from human to some species of animal. There is almost no chance that a person's brain will be more similar to that of an animal than a human, so that's simply a straw man that has no bearing on real life. 2. Gender must be affirmed. I don't know what people are smoking these days, but something has clouded the judgment of educators who think that children should be encouraged to explore their gender possibilities. While gender is genetically inborn, a boy must be trained to be a man, and a girl must be trained to be a woman. Parents play a huge role in developing gender identity in their children. Why must your narrow binary set of gender identity be affirmed? If it was such an innate thing that can't be changed, why do you claim that males must be trained to be male and females must be trained to be female? If it was such a cut and dry subject, it would not need to be affirmed. Real life is a lot messier and more complex than your simple A or B mindset. Sure, the percentage of people who don't identify with the gender they were born with is a small minority, but why should they be forced to conform to how you see the rest of the world? If it doesn't harm you, why should you care if someone tries to live as the gender that matches their brain rather than what they were assigned at birth? Yes, it is different, but recognizing a transgender person as who they want to be helps them live a full and productive life. Why is that a bad thing? Forcing someone to live a life that conforms to your narrow viewpoint is honestly the height of arrogance. People are simply finding the best way to live their lives, even if you don't like it. As long as it doesn't harm anyone, let them be who they're comfortable being. We live in a fallen world, thus, people are susceptible to gender confusion. Sexual abuse, bullying, shaming, lack of parental nurture, and many other factors can cause a child or a teenager to question their maleness or femaleness. Yet, if a person with gender confusion gets counseling and encouragement, they can overcome their emotional scars. Again, it's not just an emotional, but a biological difference. There are testable, recordable differences between cis and transgendered people. And if things like bullying and shaming are bad, why do you insist on shaming and bullying people to conform to what you think is normal, rather than letting people live the lives they want to in such a way that doesn't harm anyone? And, by the way, making you feel somewhat uncomfortable? That doesn't cause nearly as much harm as forcing someone to live a life they think is disjointed with how they identify. If you want to reduce emotional scars, try getting rid of the stigma associated with not falling into the rigid patterns you think the rest of the world needs to fall into. Intolerance is a major contributor to emotional scarring. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." The opposite is also true. If you withhold training from a child, he or she will wander in a confused state and never reach their potential. An educator who encourages the child to explore his or her gender options deserves an F for poor performance on the job. In other words, brainwash kids when they're younger and don't know better, and you'll be able to control them as adults. Yeah, I can see why you think that would be a good plan. Why would you think that an educator that encourages their students to figure things out is a bad thing? The dysphoria in gender dysphoria means distress. People in distress, by definition, are not able to live a comfortable life. Public facilities should do their best to ensure that everybody is able to live the life they want to, as long as it doesn't harm others. A person living as the gender they identify with doesn't harm anybody, except maybe giving people like you uncomfortable feelings. And being uncomfortable is trumped by letting people live their lives. I get uncomfortable when people put olives on their pizza. That doesn't mean I don't think it should be allowed to if I'm not going to have a slice. 3. Gender fluidity is a hoax. Secularists view the Bible as archaic and irrelevant, so they ignore the fact that the first chapter of Genesis says that God created mankind as male and female, Genesis 1:27. But in the past, even non-Christians believed in what America's founding fathers called the laws of nature and of nature's God. Of course, secularists like me ignore the first chapter of Genesis because, and let me say it slowly, they have no reason to believe it's true. Not everyone believes your Bible is an accurate history of the world, so there's no reason for everyone to blindly follow its teachings. And many of its teachings are archaic and irrelevant, like not wearing a blend of fabrics, or gathering sticks for firewood when it's cold out being a death-worthy offense. And America's founding fathers felt that owning other humans was a natural state of being. Just because an idea is tenacious doesn't mean it should continue as a blueprint on how we should live. If you think it's against your religious teachings to attempt to live as the gender you identify with, you don't have to transition. No one is forcing that upon you. But if someone doesn't follow your beliefs, they're under absolutely zero obligation to restrict their options in life because your Holy Scripture says anything. If I want to plant more than one type of crop in a field, that's my right, no matter what Leviticus says. Some things are just plain obvious when you look at scientific reality. Yes, and some things are not obvious until you look at the scientific facts. It was not obvious that the Earth went around the Sun because it appears the opposite, and the actions of matter on a quantum level do not match our understanding of classical mechanics. Shockingly, sometimes things are complex. Data and facts should guide our understanding of the world, not claims that should be accepted because they come from a holy text. But when people rage against God and rebel against His laws, they become really dumb. Yeah, they're the less intelligent ones. That's why in general, more educated people, and the majority of scientists these days, don't believe in or follow your God. I can't speak for all atheists, but I don't rage against God. I just don't have any reason to believe in Him. Watch it! Educators today have adopted the wacky idea that gender is fluid and changeable, even though science doesn't support this. If a man decides he's really a woman inside, he is urged to follow former athlete Bruce Jenner, who got breast implants, took hormones, started wearing makeup, and became reality TV star Caitlyn Jenner. His choice is applauded by our culture, and those who say he's emotionally troubled are viewed as hateful and bigoted. But the science does support this. As I mentioned before, there are noticeable differences in the makeup of a cis and transgendered person's brain. As for the whole Jenner thing, I applaud her for becoming the person she was more comfortable with. But as a person, I just changed the prerogative I used to describe her. I really don't care for her many political and social stances. And quite frankly, I'm more impressed with those who don't have the wealth and support system she did, and still go through a major transition to help live the lives they feel they need to. The Apostle Paul wrote that intelligent people who reject God's truth will eventually believe ridiculous things. Romans 1:22 says of them, professing to be wise, they became fools. I pray we will not allow our schools and communities to be hijacked by foolish people who deny God, science, and common sense. There are 3 points here. 1. If God doesn't want to be ignored, it needs to give us some evidence that it's there. If you claim we have to follow God's laws, and you can't show that a God, especially your specific one, exists, we can ignore the claim that laws come from it. 2. Science does affirm that transsexuality does have a genetic component. Transsexuality and gender are complex concepts rooted in aspects of genetics and biological structures. It is not simply an issue of feelings, but of proven biological complexity. 3. Finally, common sense tells me how others identify isn't your damn problem. So why do you need to meddle in people's lives? Let them live the lives they want to. Somebody else living as the gender they are comfortable with doesn't harm you at all. But I do encourage you, keep praying. Maybe if nothing changes, or, as it seems to be heading, society becomes even more progressive, it means that God approves of how society is doing. Or isn't there at all, but I doubt you'd accept that.